I wanted to draw this scene of Sacré-Cœur in Montmartre in Paris with the sort of style that would be suitable for a quick location sketch. But I also wanted to bring out what I thought was really strong difference between the foreground and the background. Now, creating a sense of depth in our drawings can be a challenging thing, and particularly when we're drawing from a photo, which does visually compress things and does give the impression that further things are actually feeling closer than they really are. When we draw, if we're drawing from a photo, we have the opportunity to put that sense of distance back into it. If we're on location, we see it more clearly. But we have the challenge of capturing that effect in our drawings because we can still concentrate on further things. And if we're not looking out for the overall effect of our drawing, we can make the mistake of overdrawing distant things, which again creates the feel that they're closer in our drawing. It's all about the relative difference between how we draw things, not so much how we draw any part of our drawing, but how it looks in relation to the other parts of our drawing. And I thought this scene, where there was a very strong, in my mind, foreground element, which are the trees, the people under the trees, the shadows of the trees, the forward slope, and a very strong background element, easily divided into two, which of course is the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur itself, was a good example just to highlight the thinking that I have and the line work and the pen choices that I have, even in a very quick, a very brisk, a very gestural drawing, such as the one I'm doing now. Now, you're watching this in double time. It actually took me 29 minutes to draw in real time, and I've doubled that speed. So if you want to watch it as a real-time drawing, you can use the cog icon and halve the speed of the video. And if you're finding this interesting and helpful, and anticipate it will continue to be so, then please hit the like button for me and help me out as well. At this stage though, I'm deliberately working really hard on these trees to draw them as fast as I can. Trees where we want a lot of darkness, a lot of value, can be challenging in a short period of time, particularly when the pen we're using is a 0.3 millimeter pen as I'm using now. Now, it was a deliberate choice, however, and when I do the Basilica behind, I switch to a 0.1. So this is the heavier pen that I'm using, but it's still a relatively fine line to create a strong sense of darkness. But I always wanted this drawing, or this sketch as I was thinking of it more, to have evidence of being rapidly drawn. This is also a good way of just forcing ourselves to push through anything that we do, any marks we make that aren't quite right, because, well, we're not giving ourselves time to be overly preoccupied with that. We want to just keep going. And I start with the foreground, which probably is a fairly basic kind of presumption to make, that in most scenes, the things that are closer we're going to draw. Now, it may not be the absolute closest thing. There may be predominantly a main subject area with things behind it. There may just be one or two things like a lamppost or a plant or something that's closer. In that case, I would start with the larger, closer object, not the absolute closest object. But I will make sure, though, as I draw the larger object that's behind, that I leave plenty of space around where the closest object is going to be. And then I'll quite possibly switch pens. Maybe I'd have used a 0.5 in this case, if there was something like that in this drawing. And I will draw it with more intention, more deliberation with the lines to give a, if you like, a sturdier look to the marks I make. That will all help to convey it as feeling closer, and even add in more detail than I would use for even the more moderately close but not closest object. Because in life, we see closest things more clearly, with sharper edges, with more detail. And so we start to want to capture that effect in the sorts of marks that we make. Now, I'm really getting a bit, not annoyed, but aware of the time that adding all this hatching is taking. And yet it is fairly fundamental, because I want these trees to be nice and dark for this drawing, because that will help bring them closer. And you'll notice when I do the basilica that even though there are some very dark sections to it in the windows particularly, that I don't create as dark an effect with my hatching for those as I do on the trees, and certainly not as dark as I do on the shadow here. So very, very rapidly I'm doing the shadow on the tree, on the ground, the shadow from the trees on the ground. And then the challenge comes to draw the basilica in a way that it feels like it's sitting back, that it's not feeling overly close to us. And I have all these figures as well. I didn't necessarily place the figures exactly the same as they were in the reference, but I did copy some of the more, what I thought, interesting poses more exactly, and then I did a few more just very quick generic poses. I also grouped the figures the way I felt they had a nice balance. I didn't group them necessarily as they were in the photo as well. It's good, if possible, to avoid a sense of equally spaced figures in something such as this. It just starts to look a bit artificial, even ironically, if it captures what was the case at the time. Also, by moving the figures slightly, we can allow more clarity for things we're drawing behind. So if there was some detail of the facade of the basilica I wanted particularly to draw, I could make sure I didn't put any figures in front of that, even if there were figures there in real life. You'll notice that I actually don't do the tree in as much detail as it moves away, or the trees, as they move away to the right. And that's not so much to create any effect with distance, but I just think stylistically, as we move to the periphery, drawing with a lighter touch is a helpful thing. It creates a bit of variation across our drawing, and variation helps our brain to see some parts differently at different times, in different ways, at different speeds to other parts. It stops the whole thing becoming almost like a brick wall of detail that it's actually hard to break into. By creating subtle emphases of some parts versus than others, we help the eye rest, or to see things more easily, or to linger, or to move on. And I think that all helps to give the drawing a sense of movement. It's not actually the drawing or the marks or lines that are moving, it's our eyes that are moving, and therefore marks and lines that enable our eyes to move more help create a sense of dynamism in our scene. So I've switched now to my 0.1mm pen, and you can see me doing what is for me a very, look, I'll use the word rough, grab of the visuals. I'm certainly not getting bogged down in trying to align things too precisely, too quickly, too precisely. It's not that approximate is good enough, and I'm not rushing it, even though I'm drawing it briskly. I'm still observing carefully as I can. But I want a very loose feel to my marks here. I want some of them to be very light. I've deliberately chosen a pen, although it's a 0.1mm pen, and it's light anyway, it's as in light because it's a thin line. This one is considerably used up. So it's starting to give evidence of being dried out when I draw with it. And these are great pens to have and to keep when we really want to get a very light effect through our mark making, where we don't have a consistent line of any thickness, but the ink gets lighter and darker in the one line because the flow is not as consistent as it would have been when the pen was new. The other thing I'm trying to do is to, when I bring the lines of the basilica down towards the trees, I'm trying to not always run them together. Now, I don't mean we should always stop our lines, a millimetre or 2 millimetres from whatever's in front, because that creates an artificial effect. But to do it substantially, maybe half the time, or maybe just in a certain part of our drawing, helps visually, as I was talking about before, as we look at a scene such as this, it gives the eye a sense of separation, therefore the brain a sense of separation of objects. It also helps to create the effect that this is actually sitting some distance back. It's very separate to what's in the front. But it's not just that the line is, if you like, a lighter, less consistent line. What I'm drawing with the line changes. Even though the basilica has more detail, or at least as much detail as anything else in the drawing, if not more detail in parts, I'm not letting myself get trapped into trying to now get that detail drawn really accurately. I'm mostly drawing by the shadows. I'm really trying to spot the shadows, the feel of the shadows, and create that feel in my drawing. And that, I think, helps the basilica to feel further back, that I create a background effect with it, whereas the heavier, darker lines, the darker values, the greater detail in the closer figures, in the closer subjects, help create a foreground sense because they're stronger and easier to see and there's more detail, and all of that tells the brain these things are closer. And the opposite is told to the brain when the things are further away. Now, I didn't put that line in the best place, and I work out why, and then I correct it. I always like to correct lines that I don't think are quite right, and I think that usually the incorrect line isn't as obvious at the end when we add other things to it. I have quite a few videos on creating the effect of depth, so if this is something you're interested in maybe pursuing more consciously in your drawings, then check out my other videos. I'm not sure if there's a separate playlist on it, but there's certainly a lot of them in my playlist of drawing the effect of a scene, not drawing the actual scene, drawing the effect of the detail. Because part of the effect that we want to capture is not just complexity, but distance. So here I am with the church and the main entrance. Now I made sure I positioned this main entrance at the correct place in relation to the basilica that we can see above. And I also don't let myself draw this doorway too dark. If I draw it too dark, it's going to make it feel closer than the trees. And I don't want that. That's then going to give a mixed message, which leads to confusion, which actually stops us from understanding quickly what we're looking at. And particularly in a quick drawing, we want to reduce some of the visual complexity and some of the visual elements of our scene to a degree that it's easily understood. And particularly when we're not using colour, we lose one of the really obvious identifiers of what's what when we look at something in life. So I need to capture that in my line work still another way. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. Creating a sense of depth, of distance, of depth of plane within our drawing is a tremendously effective way of introducing a strong sense of realism into what we've drawn. So if that's something that we want in our drawings, this is a great skill to pursue. And I hope this drawing has helped you do that. You'll find the reference, of course, on my channel community page if you want to have a go of this particular scene. But hey, whatever you're drawing and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.